this stuff in Proverbs. I just thought it was disconnected verses, again, because the way every Bible is set up along that line. It's just every verse is disconnected. But I have really enjoyed looking at this and seeing this one guy just bringing it together in a lot of passages that I never even thought of before. So I have really enjoyed this. Would you lead us? Let's make sure I'm recording here. Yeah, I'm recording. Good deal. Okay. All righty. All right. Would you lead us in a prayer, brother?
Sure.
Thank you.
Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this day, and we thank you for all the blessing that you give to us. We know that all good things in this life come from you, Father. Father, we pray that you would be with us now as we study your word. It's so precious to us, Father, and provides a foundation for our lives. Pray that you would be with Brother Tommy as he delivers the word to us this evening. May we learn much from your holy book and see those ways that apply to our lives. Father, we know that we all fall short and that we sin, and we pray humbly, Father, that you would forgive us of those sins and that you would be with us throughout this evening's class, and that we would always put you first in our lives. Forgive us, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Chapter 19 deals with wealth and poverty. Wealth and poverty. And again, there's a lot of wise sayings in here about how to gain this. In chapter 19, verses 1 through 7, is mainly talking about the problems that we have with poverty. And so I think, again, as we go through this, it's going to, again, a lot of this is going to be tied up closer than again, what we think about sometimes. Number one, he emphasizes the idea in verses 1 and 2 that poverty is not the worst thing in the world. He says, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips. And it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he who sins hastens with his feet. So the idea is it's better to be honest and remain poor than to be one that's seeking to escape the poverty and going and getting down to the dishonest life. And verse 2 kind of connects with that idea, because sometimes he said, it is also not good for a soul to be without knowledge. So sometimes a poor person may act through ignorance. They've not been taught how to manage money. They've not been taught how to deal with things that come up in their lives in that respect. So it's interesting that he ties those two ideas together as you think about it. He who hastens with his feet sins or misses the mark. As some other translations say, it emphasizes that idea. So again, desire without knowledge is not good. Whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way is the English Standard Version on that. So again, the two reprehensible lines of action is the ideal of an ignorant ignorant person who has no purpose in view, and then you have those that recklessly go forward anyway without even thinking about what's going on in that respect. Verse 3, the foolishness of a man twists his way and his heart frets against the Lord. A lot of times a poor man will do what? He will be angry with God. Again, through sometimes their own stupid choices, and we've all made those stupid choices from time to time, but through all of those stupid choices we sometimes then have a tendency to blame God for it. He ruins his life. And God is not the one that's responsible for that. But he blames God for his failure. And again, I've met a lot of people like that. You probably have too, that, they make some wrong decisions, boneheaded decisions, as we might say sometimes. And what? They're blaming God for everything. Why didn't God why didn't God stop me? Why didn't God do this? Why didn't God do that? Verses 4 through 7. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friend. A false witness will not go unpunished. Let me kind of get this straightened out here. There we go. And he who speaks lies will not escape. For some reason or another, my computer thing here is not working quite right. Can't get verse 6 there. But anyway, I can get it from my book. I'm going to be reading some of this from the English Standard Version tonight. I forgot my New King James Version, so I was trying to do that from another thing. All right, so where was I? I was in verse 4 through 7. Wealth brings many new friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friend. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will not escape. Many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts. All a poor man's brothers hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursues them with words, but does not have them. So here you have, again, this feeling of friendlessness. Verse 5, or verse 6, many seek the favor of a generous man. So as you think about it, the idea that everybody's looking out for him because he's wanting the riches that come from that. I'm reminded again of Luke chapter 15, the parable of the prodigal son. He had plenty of friends as long as he had what? The money to back it up. But then after that, he was long gone. All right. So he says, wealth brings many new friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friend. At the end of it, that's the parable of the prodigal son right there, isn't it? They're all gone. He says, a false witness will not go unpunished. He who breathes out lies will not escape. So again, it's the idea of a man who's lying. He shall not escape. Again, they lie as much as they breathe, as it was. Every word is false. So again, that person is censured for that. Many are the ones who favor the noble or the rich, again, as the passage emphasizes, verse 6. Seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts. How true that is. And I mean, that's just so wonderful about that, right? And again, this particular guy that brings out this idea thinks he may be talking here about a wealthy politician. You elect me, I will do this, right? And again, we have that whole scenario in our country today simply because we have so many people that promise the world and then they can't keep the promises, or they promise the world, and that's part of the reason why we're $20 trillion in debt in our country right now. So that says something about that. And then again, he emphasizes the idea, he says, going down to verse 7, he says, a poor man's brothers hate him, but how much more do his friends go far from him? He can't find any friends. They avoid him. They just try to stay as far away from him as they can. Again, you have friends that are willing to help you no matter what, but then there are others that are not. One of the things that impresses me a lot whenever I'm sitting and thinking about this, the ideal of the poor and what they do, is sometimes you watch and look and see how some of the how the homeless treat one another. They may not have anything, but they're willing to take the little they got and give it to somebody else. It's interesting in that respect that they do that, maybe perhaps because they understand it better than most of us and how just that little bit of encouragement might encourage somebody. So as you're looking at this, you can't help but realize that some people will avoid the poor man, but again, on the other hand, there are those that will help him out. And so they're nowhere to be found a lot of times, right? They're nowhere to be found. Verses 8 through 15, things that are not fitting. All right? Whoever gets sense loves his own soul. He who keeps understanding will discover good. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who speaks lies shall perish. Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. The discretion of a man slows him to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. King's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. Foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentions of her wife are continual dripping. Whoa, okie dokie then. All right. Verse 14, house and wealth are inherited from fathers, but prudent wives from the Lord. Slothfulness cast into deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. So here's a bunch of things that are not fitting. All right. First off, verse 9, he emphasizes 8 and 9, the idea of, again, verse 8 says a false witness will not go unpunished. So these are not fitting. Don't lie. He who breathes out lies will perish. Verse 9, the idea of perjury. The witness of lies will not be held guiltless. A false witness will not go unpunished. And he who breathes out lies will perish. So again, you have that idea that, lying is wrong. Verse 10, luxury. He emphasizes luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant to rule over princes. So again, a fool would abuse luxury, become the more confirmed in his folly. But that should not ever be the case. Rage, verse 11 and 12. Good sense makes one slow to anger, and in his glory to overlook an offense. A king's wrath is like the roaring of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. So here you again, this idea of rage, getting yourself under control. We've seen that brought up again and again and again. Think about again how that might have something to do with poverty, how that might have something to do with wealth. Again, an intelligent person restrains himself by overlooking the petty annoyances of life. How's traffic up there in Missouri, besides the snow? I think about that a lot whenever I think about this thing. That's what ticks me off quicker than anything is people and the way they drive. You know what I'm saying, around Atlanta. And I just had to ask, how is the traffic up there?
It is non-existent. The town only has 12,000 people, and my wife and I always joke that, let's just go and get something from the Chinese food restaurant. And then we joke, we go, well, it takes so long to get there. It's a good 5 minutes from the house. that is a luxury. We're really not, the only thing we're far away from is where we worship. We're about 30, 35 minutes away from the congregation we worship at. But other than that, everything's 5 minutes from the house.
Yeah. And you see, that's the sweet part about it. Again, I've often made the one, I remember growing up again in Alabama, and it just didn't seem like traffic. We took our time. We didn't get all that upset about it. But now it's just right here in Atlanta. It's just like, no, this is just, come on, people. Where did you drive? And I sometimes think a lot about that whenever I come to these passages about rage and anger and wrath and things like that, because that's the thing that seems to hit my buttons worse than any. I don't know why. I can't understand why, but it does. It really does. It is. And I hope that maybe I could kind of get back in another place somewhere down the line and just kind of, okay, it's no big deal. Okay. Domestic disharmony, verse 13, 14. A foolish son is ruined to his father, and a wife's quarrel, and there's continual dripping of the rain. Health and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. So again, a wife's nagging drives her husband out of the house, is what one particular version says. House and riches are the inheritance of fathers, but from Yahweh is an intelligent wife. And again, I've got an intelligent wife. I'm grateful to her every day. Without her, I don't know where I'd be, what I'd be doing. And again, that's just so, I thank God for her every day. And so think about it in that respect. Laziness results in deep sleep, and the idle soul shall suffer hunger. A lazy person sleeping when he should be working. Okay. Deep sleep comes from a Hebrew word which means profound insensibility. You are in a trance, and nothing's going to break you out of the trance, kind of the way it's brought out here. So laziness enfeebles the mind, corrupts the higher faculties, and we become like an animal in that respect. So as he looks at it and as he continues to talk about this wealth and how it all fits together, again, laziness is not going to bring about that wealth, right? That idle soul shall suffer hunger. That they shall wind up regretting it before it's all over with. All right, and then verses 16 through 24, the end of the chapter, well, not the end of the chapter, he brings out this idea of family wisdom. Whoever keeps the commandment keeps his life. He who despises his ways will die. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Discipline your son, for there is hope. Do not set your heart on putting him to death. A man of great wrath will pay the penalty, for if you deliver him, you will only have to do it again. Listen to advice and accept wisdom, instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. Many are the plans of the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. What is desired in a man is steadfast love, and a poor man is better than a liar. Fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. But the sluggard buries his hand in the dish and will not even bring it back to his mouth. That's lazy. Every time I read that passage, I kind of laugh about it. But yeah, that's just, they're too lazy to even put their hand to the mouth. So you have verse 16, 17, obedience. All right. Whoever keeps the commandments keeps his life. And so again, it emphasizes that idea. The Torah, probably the law of Moses, keep the commandments of God. So that's very important as you think about it. And this man that is keeping the commandments of God is going to be looking out for the poor and helping the poor. Whoever is generous to the poor listens to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. Even though the poor man can't repay us, who's going to? God will. And again, I like that idea when this guy said the Lord always pays his debts. So if you could say anybody owes anything, that he owes anybody anything, but that's again, that idea. Discipline is necessary. Discipline your son, for there is hope. Okay, chasten your son, for there is hope. Again, in verse, while there is hope is what he says in the New King James Version. So again, all those ideas are brought out. While there is hope, the discipline should be administered while there's hope. While the child is young and impressionable, and he doesn't get in bad habits. So again, it starts off early and it continues. Don't set your heart on putting him to death. Don't set your heart on his destruction, is the idea that if we don't discipline, then again, they can lend to death. But then there's that other ideal as well. You can discipline too hard, too harshly, and wind up, as we see often in our culture today, where kids are beat to death. And that's not a good thing either in that respect. So again, he's emphasizing the idea, don't be a willing party to his death, either because he is making the wrong decisions and you've led him to do that, let him get away with it, or, as we talked about a moment ago, just literally beating him to death. Don't do that either. So there's that ideal of balance, that ideal of making sure that we don't go too far one way or the other. And again, if there's one thing that is needed in this country, and if there's one thing that's needed in our lives, it is balance. Balance is that book that Brother Ira North wrote. In the church, we need balance. Everything in balance. Because again, sometimes we act too quickly, and it turns out not very good for us. Self-control again. A man of great temper must pay the price. If you rescue him, you will only have to do it again. So again, you may very well emphasize again over and over, you're going to have to control it. So he may be saved from the consequences of his intemperance once and again, but if he doesn't change the way he gets angry, then again, he may vent his wrath even on the person that saves him, on the deliverer. And so again, you'll have to do it again and again. So what do we need to do? Have that wisdom. Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom. Many are the plans of the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Okay? So again, you have the plans of man, the purpose of God, and nary the twain shall meet unless the man is trying to follow God. So as you think that, and we have that, we need to make sure that what we are doing is according to what God says and what God expects and what God desires of us. Verse 22, what is desired in a man is steadfast love. That steadfast love is one of the things that in this particular, in the English Standard Version anyway, is translated steadfast love. But if you look in the other translations, they translate this word mercy. And so it's interesting. I like that idea, with the idea that it is steadfast love, because that's what mercy is. It's steadfast. It's going to be there no matter what. So again, in verse, he's emphasizing that idea. What is desired in a man is kindness. Again, another reading there would be loving kindness, or the ideal of mercy. All those words are tied in together. Again, as I said, as I read through the English Standard Version, I keep seeing that ideal of steadfast love, and I thought, well, that's a very good definition of that. Steadfast love. That's what, again, we need. Whenever we let people down or people let us down, we're going to be there for them. Whenever we let somebody down, hopefully they've got the mercy for us. Jesus, one of my favorite passages that I always think about so often in this is the ideal of, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That was an Old Testament passage that Jesus used in reference to the scribes and Pharisees. They didn't do it. They didn't show that steadfast love. They didn't show that mercy, that compassion. And as a result of it, Jesus really was very upset with them. I think sometimes you have to have balance, but I think sometimes maybe we are quicker to judge and to reproach than we are to extend mercy and grace and love. At the same time, I want somebody to extend that to me, even though maybe I'm not extending it to the other. So it's a wrestle. It really is, as we're struggling with that. And I think a lot about it. Think about what would happen in the church today if we did extend a lot more of that steadfast love. When brothers sin, we don't write them off. We say, well, you messed up. Thank God for his grace. God forgives you now. How are you going to live better? What are you going to do different? Maybe if we did more encouraging in that respect, maybe we would keep more of them. I would hope so. So that's so vitally important. All right. So again, honesty, verse 22. What is desired in a man is steadfast love, and a poor man is better than a liar. The fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. So you've got to have that fear of the Lord. Now here again, we come back to something we saw back in chapter 1. It keeps popping up over and over and over and over and over again. So living a God-fearing life brings about a situation where we can rest satisfied. Now again, remember also, he says here in the English Standard, he said he will not be visited by harm. That don't always find the case. We remember that in the New Testament, a lot of those Christians gave their lives for Christ. And we would think from that viewpoint strictly that fearing the Lord, respecting God, what God wanted, made them die. But again, that's not the worst thing. Death for the Christian is not the worst thing. So, sometimes it gets, that is so totally different to what the world thinks and to what I think sometimes, well, I got to save my life. I've got to do whatever I can to protect myself. And with God, that's not what it's all about. Verse 24, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish, and he will not even bring it back to his nostrils. And again, here you have, like we saw earlier, you kind of have it broke back down to the idea of here's this lazy man again. So earlier he emphasized the idea that a slothfulness cast into deep sleep, verse 15. Here again you have the sluggard buries his hand in the dish and will not even bring it back to his mouth. He can't even feed himself. So what do you need to do? Strike a scoffer. The simple will learn prudence. Reprove a man of understanding, and he will gain knowledge. So laziness is condemned. Discipline is commended. So again, he's emphasizing that's what needs to be happening. And then beginning in 19 verse 26 through the 22nd chapter, we need to acknowledge God in every day of our life. Okay? So as we continue to look at this, we're going to see this. Another reference to the son. He who does violence to his father and chases away his mother is a son who brings shame and reproach. Cease to hear instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. A worthless son or a worthless witness, mocks at justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Condemnation is ready for scoffers and beating for the back of the fool. So here he says authority. In chapter 19, he's talking about mocking that which is right in the home, and then the next mocking what is right in court. All right, in the home, he who does violence to mother and father chases away his mother is a son who brings shame and reproach. Mistreat father, mistreat mother. You're wrong. You're doing wrong in doing that. Cease to hear instruction, and you will stray from the word of knowledge. Again, make sure you put the wise knowledge into practice. Don't ever forget that. He goes on, now mocking the authorities. A worthless witness mocks at justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Condemnation is ready for scoffers, beating for the back of fools. So again, the worthless witness, in the Hebrew word here for worthless witness, or the worthless witness in both cases, Belial. So you will find in scriptures where somebody might be called the son of Belial. And again, it suggests one who is knowingly, eagerly wanting to give false witness. They're scoffing at justice. There's no sense of personal obligation to see the standards of society maintained. They're swallowing iniquity like a tasty beverage. They're just rejoicing in iniquity. So he says what? These scorners are going to receive the beating for the back because of that. That's what's going to happen. They're going to receive, the stripes, the condemnation of the Old Testament, beaten with 40 stripes save one, that ideal of Moses. So again, we've already seen that back in chapter 18, verse 6, where he said, a fool's lips walk into a fight and his mouth invites a beating. The English Standard Version there in Proverbs 18, verse 6. All right. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1 through 19. Glad you're here, brother. I was getting kind of concerned, but glad Jerome showed up. Huh?
It's a little tardy.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. You're here. That's what's important.
Come hang out with my buddy here.
There you go. Thank you, brother. Yeah. All right. We're in chapter 20, verse 1 now, and we're just continuing to rock on, do what we need to be doing in that respect. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. So now, in this first section here, he's going to talk about some vices, some things, again, and the first thing he mentions was wine, intoxicating beverages. A mocker is somebody who scoffs at what is holy and ridicules all that is serious. Strong drinks is anything that's not mixed, or from what we understand from the Hebrew word here, it's not made from grapes. So it might be the fermentation of certain fruit juices like pomegranates and dates and things along that line. So strong drink often causes people to what? Boisterous brawlers, and they can't control themselves. They don't care about their morality. And again, he says, whoever is led astray thereby is not wise or will not become wise. So again, how often do these people make bad decisions when they're drunk and then wind up regretting it, and then they keep going back? I can tell you the stories of people that I know that are members of the church that have strayed away, and you go see them. One person in particular I'm thinking of right now has been in the hospital for about the last 6 weeks because he got drunk, fell down a flight of steps, broke his neck. And he really got messed up. He had broken his neck earlier, about 3 or 4 years ago. And so now they're not sure what's going to happen with him. He's walking. He's able to do everything again, but, that's what needs to happen. But again, what can we do to encourage that? I don't know. We keep on trying to encourage it in every way we can. All right. Chapter 20, verse 2. The terror of the king is like a roaring lion. The wrath of a king is like the roaring of a lion. Whoever provokes him to anger sins against his own life. So you've got intoxicating beverages. You wind up making a king angry, okay? So it's like a roar. The lion roars when he springs upon his prey. And by that time, it's what? It's too late. It's absolutely too late. So why would anybody do that with a king? Well, they just feel like maybe for whatever reason they need to. There's no escape. So you can't escape royal wrath, as it was, whenever you have placed your life in jeopardy because you've done that. Verse 3, it's honor for a man to keep aloof from strife, but every fool will be quarreling. So try to stay away from what? Try to stay away from trouble and all the things that are there. Stop striving. Any fool. I like the New King James Version here. Since any fool can start a quarrel. It don't take a lot of intelligence to start a quarrel, does it? I mean, it just doesn't really take that much. All right. So think about, again, how often this social media helps us do that a lot, right? It really does. You can get into a quarrel just that quick, and before you know it, it's lost friendships and everything else.
You're on YouTube and you have a religious discussion
Mm-hmm.
with somebody who's religious, and you say something they don't agree with, then they call you an idiot.
Yeah, or that's kind, I guess you might say, because sometimes it even gets worse than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm like, okay. I respond, your speech betrayed you.
Yeah, your speech betrayeth you. That's right. That's right. And then again, here we got the lazy people, again, verse 4. And these vices, A strong drink, an angry king. So again, there's that ideal of anger, strife, and now you have laziness. Because the lazy man will not plow because of winter, he will beg during harvest and have nothing. So again, after the harvest in the autumn, in the fall, the work of plowing must be done. Here, especially in Palestine, the ground was softer because of the winter rains, and you could easily work it then. But I remember, again, growing up on a farm, whenever we haven't had rain for about 3 or 4 weeks and trying to stick a plow in that ground, it's just absolutely crazy. You cannot do it. You're working yourself to death trying to get that through there. So again, every day he just puts off tilling the land, and then his land is never cultivated. I, again, planted a little garden this year. I'm going to make a bigger one this next year, God willing. But all through this year, I'm taking out eggshells and all that other stuff and plowing it about every other week or so, plowing it up in this little garden I've got. So that by the time I will probably have, hopefully, one of the best fertilized gardens anywhere around. One year, again, and I want to talk about, one year I never will forget this. I planted a garden in my backyard in another place, and what I did at the very end of the season is I went and got 3 truckloads of horse manure, and I threw it on top, and then I plowed it all in, and then I started planting the garden the next year. I did not use 1 drop of chemical fertilizer that year, and man, I had the best garden ever. So I'm looking for the horse manure now. and I'm going to try to, like I said, try to make this garden a little bit bigger next time to where, and so that it's just that simple little work like that, doing it right at the right time in the right way, and then you can get results as a result, and not have to deal with some of the stuff you have to deal with. All right, let's look at human character, verses 5 through 12. All right. We're human beings and we're weak morally, right? We really are. There's that tendency to sin. We're living in a sinful world, and there's that constant thing of always wanting, to do something we know we shouldn't, or to say something we shouldn't say. Again, so he's going to talk about here in the idea, as we're looking through these next few verses, in verses 5 through 12, he's going to talk about the person that's faithful to his commitments, committed to integrity, impartial in judgment, humble in his own evaluation of himself, and he's honest in business. So as we look at that, we'll see that. But sometimes, again, it's hard to understand these things. Counsel in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. So again, here you have, a lot of times we think things or we do things in a way that's I'm trying to figure out that we conceal it by the way we live. I don't really know what anybody's thinking. I used to think I could, and I thought I could read you can read somebody's face, but you still don't know what they're thinking. And so here, sometimes the person's words betray their thinking, but also sometimes their words cover up their thinking, right? And so you don't really know. So it's like, that's what he's saying. It's like deep water in the bosom of the earth. It's the idea, it's hard to really find what a person's intent really is. So you've got to question. A man of understanding will what? He's going to draw it out. Most men will proclaim his own goodness. Okay, and again, the word there for goodness can be translated his own mercy. The idea of he's going to announce his enduring mercy, but who can really find a faithful man? A man that is going to be faithful to do what needs to be done. A lot of people boast about their charity, but they're not really faithful. They may boast about, and what does he mean by faithful? Well, think about it. When we think about a husband being faithful to a wife, or a wife being faithful to a husband, what does that really boil down to? It's keeping a promise. Keeping a promise. So, if you promise something to somebody to help somebody out, then you need to keep that promise. And that's, again, what he's trying to emphasize here. We sometimes can't tell what's going on in the heart of the man, but we can tell by their actions. There is a difference, the contrast between a promise and making the promise or fulfilling the promise, right? Verse 7, the righteous man walks in his integrity and his children are blessed after him. Again, a man in integrity is a person who is loyal to his moral principles and the ordinances of God. He's choosing to model a moral life in front of his children. Verse 8, a king who sits on the throne of judgment scatters all evil with his eyes. So again, here's the chief magistrate of the land. He's the one that's going to have to sit down and make the final judgment on some things, perhaps. And so again, he needs to be distinguished by impartial justice. He's not going to take sides. He sifts the true from the false and the evidence submitted to him. So again, especially these anointed rulers like David, Solomon, and Saul, they should have been the ones that were standing for what's right in every circumstance. But again, think about how many of them, especially toward the end of the latter days of the Judean kingdom, a lot of them didn't care. A lot of them weren't even trying to do what's right. So again, there's that idea. All right, now if it's true in the words of kings, how untrue is it when it comes to wait a minute. Okay, yeah, okay. All right. Well, if it's true in the words of kings, how important should it be when it comes to people? Who can say, I have made my heart pure, I'm clean from my own sins? So you have just judicial discernment. Then in verses 9 and 10, you have personal discernment. Can any of us really say, I've made my heart clean, I'm pure from sin? No. Why? We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? He will say, if a man in 1 John 1:7, he emphasizes the idea if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another. If we say we have no sin, we lie, right? And the truth is not in us. So again, there are some people that are trying to deceive themselves and say, well, I'm not a sinner. I don't know what you're talking about. See, they don't really realize what they're doing. Self-righteous. They're conceited. They're proud of their spiritual condition. And again, that's what he's suggesting here in verse 9. Who could say, I've made my heart pure, I'm clean from my sin? So an unequal weight and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. So when you're talking about how does this fit in together with what the verse he just said? Well, some of these very people who claim to be right, to do justice, will cheat somebody. Give them the first chance, right? So you have to be careful. You have to be careful to them. So we've got to really look at ourselves. God hates fraudulent practices. He hates, dishonest traders use two sets of measures, one for buying, one for selling. Okay, so as you think about it, it's a warning against judging a neighbor by a standard that one is unwilling to apply to himself. And again, how often does that happen in the church? How often does that happen in the world? We've got to, that's what he's saying, diverse weights and diverse measures. And we justify it. Well, I can judge you because at least I go to church. Well, that don't necessarily mean nothing, right? But you're not going to church, and therefore I could judge you and say you're wicked, and vice versa. So that's what the world's doing to us today, right? Well, you Christians think you've got it all figured out, and lo and behold, you sin just like everybody else do, right? All right, let's look at this basis of discernment, verse 11 and 12. Even a child is known by his deeds, whether he does good or right. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. So how do you decide? You know what a person's actions are, or you know how a person is by his actions and by his speech, right? So, a child is known by his deeds. And so how much so is that true? So whether what he does is pure and right. So again, there's that idea. A child, it doesn't take long when children are around adults. They start learning how to what? Lie, because they know they're going to get in trouble. Habits are learned early in life. The boy is the father of the man, right? Think about that. The conduct of the lad will soon cause, you'll see if the way they're going. So this is go back to chapter 22. Train up a child in the way they should go, right? So that's, again, what's brought out there. God has given all of us the ability to hear, the ability to see, so that we could judge character. We could judge character by what they see and hear in the speech and action of others. A child will repeat what their parents say, right?
Yeah.
And so again, I never will forget years ago, and this is something I never have forgotten, but years ago we had Frank Chesser come and preach in a gospel meeting for us in Bowden. We had two little boys, Chris and Shane. Brandon wasn't even thought of at that moment in time. And Frank, my wife had grown up listening to Frank Chesser preach over in Thompson, Georgia. And so we had him in a meeting over there, and everything was going fine. But he stayed with us that week. And, we did all that we could to encourage him. And he'd take my boys aside, and he'd say, "Come here." And he'd say, "Tell me all the things your mom and daddy told you not to tell anybody." And, of course, my children are like, huh? Mom and daddy had never done that. But that's exactly what he said, and I never have forgotten that. And now sometimes I go in and I say, "Come here and tell me what your mom and daddy told you not to tell anybody." I might regret that one of these days. All right. Verses 13 through 19. How you in the workplace. All right. How you live in the workplace. Love not sleep, lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes and you'll have plenty of bread. Bad, says the buyer, right? It is good for nothing, says the buyer. When he's gone his way, then he boasts. There's gold and multitude of riches, rubies, but the lips of knowledge are precious jewel. Take the garment of one who is surety for a stranger and hold it as a pledge when it is for seductress. Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man. Afterward, the mouth will be filled with gravel. Plans are established by counsel. By wise counsel, wage war. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with one who flatters with his lips. Oh, that's kind of helping us to see some things here, right? So think about this. Number one, emphasizes putting your religion into practice. Be industrious, okay? Don't be sleeping when there's work to be done. Again, what he said, remember what he said in chapter 19, verse 15, where he said in that particular place, slothfulness cast into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. So be energetic enough to avoid the poverty. So he says here, do not love sleep. Open your eyes, or lest you come to open your eyes, suggests the idea of look for what needs to be done and get it done. Confidence. Bad, says the buyer, right? It's good for nothing, cries the buyer. So the idea is, but going his way, then praises himself. The buyer always depreciates the goods which he wants in order to get the price reduced. Then after paying the cheaper price, he brags to everybody how smart he is. Every time I think of this, I think of trading cars. Okay? They're never going to give us what we think that we want, but their car is worth so much more because it's so much better, right? And maybe that's the reason why we get so, I just get kind of, I'm not going to say physically sick, but I would rather take a beating than have to go try to trade cars. You know what I'm trying to say? Simply because it just becomes a nightmare. Yeah. And then you go back, I remember I traded two trucks in to get my truck that I had now. My dad, who passed away, I couldn't drive two trucks. He had a nice truck, and I had a little 4-cylinder stick shift. Wished I'd kept that truck. That was a fine little old truck, but anyway, saved gas mileage. But anyway, they told me, well, we can only give you this so much for your truck. And I said, oh, well, and we finally reached our agreement. About 3 or 4 days later, I drove by the dealership, and they made, if they got what they asked for it, they probably made $3,000-4,000 off that truck. You see what I'm trying to say? It's like, oh, man, from now on, I'm going to just sell my own car and just do the best I can with what I got. Another thing I always try to do whenever I do it is I try to be honest if they're not. Well, here's a problem I know that this truck's got, you know.
Yeah.
So, but again, I'm going to come out on the good, you know. Knowledge, okay? Knowledge. There's gold in the multitude of riches, but what? Knowledge is better than all of that. You can have gold, you can have riches, but you need knowledge. Lips uttering knowledge are more valuable than gold or coral. Firmness. All right, the ideal of take a garment that is security for a stranger and hold him in pledge. That is a pledge on account of what? Hold it as a pledge when it is for a seductress or for alien men. Again, we understand from Exodus 22, verse 25, that a lot of times somebody would actually pawn their clothes for the surety of a debt. And every night, according to what he says in Exodus chapter 22, you had to give his cloak back to him because that's what he slept in. So you're talking about a man that really doesn't have much. It's not like our closets today where we've got 10 or 12 coats and we've got all these other clothes. They literally, in a lot of situations, they maybe had 1 or 2 changes of clothes and that was it. And he's talking here about a poor man. So again, he's not saying that it's wrong to mistreat a man that's fallen into debt. But here you have a person that's what? Listen to bad advice, willfully neglecting that good advice. And so again, what? As a result, they've come to nothing. And so again, he emphasizes that idea. You hold it as a pledge for a seductress, somebody that is trying to do something else. If a person doesn't ignore or a person ignores this advice, then he says, hold him to the consequences. Take his garments. And again, that might teach him what? Well, you know, and sometimes they sit back, well, they're members of the church or they're this way. They're not going to mistreat us. They're not going to do something like that to us. Talking with another brother today that got into the renting business and he bought one house and he said, okay, I'm going to rent and I'm going to make some money. And the first renter he had left their apartment. He didn't do the background check. They left the apartment, owing a bunch of money in the apartment, got into his house and made 2 payments. And then that was it. So he had to take them to court. You know what I'm trying to say? And it's like, he said, I got out of that situation. He said, you know, the first thing I did after that, he said, I rented it to one other person. The other person did him even worse than that. What'd he do? He cut his losses. He turned around and sold the house. He said, I am not getting into the renting business. And again, and I told him, I said, well, you know, I've thought about it. I mean, my wife thought about doing that at one time, rent some houses out. But I said, if I ever had to evict somebody, it'd be all over the news how the preacher at such and such a place would mistreat somebody because they kicked them out of the house whenever they needed some place to live. Nope, not going to go down that road. Not going to go down that road. All right. Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterwards his mouth is filled with gravel. Again, there's that ideal of honesty. The bread of falsehood is false. Okay. You feel pride in your ability to hoodwink his brother, but when the fraud is discovered, the consequences are more unpleasant, right? There's no nourishment. It's like eating gravel. I like that. Eating gravel, right? And that's not something I want to be doing. But he said that's exactly how it plays out. Prudence, verse 18. Plans are established by counsel, but by wise counsel wage war. We need advice. War sometimes is a necessary evil. God, all throughout the Old Testament, waged war through his people, right? Yeah. And we understand that, but you know, you've got to really think about that. I was watching another series on World War II and how a lot of missteps, a lot of mistakes made after the League of Nations, you know, and everything like that. And then when Germany started doing that stuff, nobody was willing to back up and stop them and say, you've got to stop, until it was too late. Yeah. And then we were engaged in World War II. And so there's so much that can be said about that. You know, we, especially as us Americans, we have this nasty tendency to get in everybody else's business, thinking it's ours and wind up regretting it in the process, right? Yeah, they should have.
30s.
But at that time, Hitler had been doing a great deal to build his armaments up. Britain and France, they hadn't.
Mhm.
So they declared war on him, but they had no means of really getting back there and trying to stop him. And it just got worse and worse as everything goes. And of course, what was America doing?
Sitting back.
Minding our own business, saying we got involved in the first one. We don't want to get involved with the second one. And then we wound up getting involved whether we want to or not. So there you go. War is going to happen. It's going to happen. But you got to think things through. And you got to make sure if a country gets into a war, they ought to get into a war with the idea of winning,
Yeah.
not fighting to a stalemate. You win, and that's that. That's all I'm going to say about that. Confidentiality, verse 19. He who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with one who flatters with the lips. So, what, don't associate with somebody who's always flattering to you. Why? Because they're going to take some of the things you say and go back and tell somebody else. Don't associate with a gossiper who spreads confidential information. They cannot be trusted. Don't do it. Don't just stay as far away from them as you can. The one who opens wide his lips is what? Or flatters with his lips. That word, who flatters with his lip in the New King James Version, could be who opens wide his lip. What does it mean? He can't keep his mouth shut. And again, that's so easy to get into, right? All right, I got 7:24. Let's take about a 5-minute break, and we'll get back about 7:30ish. All righty? Give me a chance to wet my whistle a little bit. Let me pause this recording.
Got anybody going?
Yeah. Okay. Important relationships. Chapter 20, verse 20 through the 21st chapter, verse 4. All right. These seem to be a thematic group, and the idea there's a lot of what we call the Jehovah Proverbs, where the Lord is mentioned somehow or another. So again, keep these in mind. And there are going to be 3 proverbs that are referring directly to kings in here. All right. First off, Yahweh, which is another name for God, Jehovah, and mankind. What's God going to do? Let's start off in verse 20. Chapter 20, verse 20 through 25. If one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness. An inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. Do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord. He will deliver you. Unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales are not good. A man steps from the Lord. How then can a man understand his way? And it is a snare to say rashly it is holy, and to reflect only after making vows. So, as you're looking at this, you find the phrase in verse 22, wait for the Lord. Unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord. A man's steps are from the Lord. So you begin to see these phrases dealing with these ideas. Now, what's he saying in verse 20, chapter 20, verse 20 and 21, when he says, if a man curses his father or his mother, his lap will be put out of utter darkness. And an inheritance gained hastily in the beginning, right? So what is he trying to get across here?
Well, just like your days are going to be short.
Right. And again, it suggests the idea that if you're cursing father or mother, or maybe you abuse the parents and you got your inheritance in a way that you should not, you can count on the fact that you're going to be punished. Yeah. And who's going to do the punishing? God. Well, obviously, the parents can't, obviously. Society might, but again, God's going to be able to do it, and he's going to emphasize that idea. So, the stubborn, the disobedient son, whoever does that in that respect, God's going to make sure that they're going to be put out in utter darkness. All right? So, and again, it will not be blessed in the end. So you go on a little bit further in verse 22, he emphasizes again the idea that what? Do not say, let me recompense evil. Wait for Jehovah and what? Let Jehovah deal with it. So let God handle it. Remember, vengeance is mine, I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, how often do we want to get our revenge somehow, some way or another in that respect? It's to recompense evil means to return evil for evil, okay? And again, God is telling us over and over again that we need to let God handle it as opposed to us handling it. Easier said than done, because we want our pound of flesh. That's probably the big problem about that. We often talk about, quote, our pound of flesh. And that's part of the reason why I think we have a trouble with forgiveness, because vengeance, if we take it, is always going to exact more than what's really just, right? God's justice, God's vengeance is going to be just in every sense of the term. So it's important that we do that, make sure of that.
Well, our vengeance usually never ends.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We just hold on to that grudge. That's
right. So he emphasizes the idea that we need to what? Wait on the Lord. Let God handle it and let God take care of it. All right. Verse 23, honest dealings. Unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales are not good. So again, God's attitude toward diverse weights, we've already seen in chapter 20, verse 10. In chapter 11, verse 1, the false weights as well as the false balance. God provides guidance. A man steps from the Lord. How can a man understand his way? All right. The great and powerful man depends on their final calls upon God, who controls results. I think about that. A man, okay, a man's step. In the Hebrew, this is Adam, where we get the word Adam. Okay, so it's interesting in that respect. A great and powerful man depends upon God controlling the results. But we as the weak mortal, we can't see every side, right? We try, but we can't. We can't begin to comprehend the beginning, the middle, and the end in one view like God can. We can only see what we can see. So sometimes Tommy needs to let God handle that, number one. But number two, also realize you've got to make the best decision you can at the moment without trying to think about all the consequences. Now, have you ever really thought about or ever overthought anything? Has anybody ever overthought anything? I have. I do all the time. What are the consequences? What can possibly happen here in this situation? And then it becomes very close to worry, because we're so worried about the consequences that we're afraid or we're paralyzed to do anything, or we're so worried about the consequences that we charge ahead and make the wrong decisions. So it's something there in that respect to think about it. We need above all, and this is part of the reason why Jesus will tell us in Matthew chapter 6 that what? We need to pray about everything, right? Ask God's help. Prayer makes us stop for a few moments and stop considering just what's in front of us, right there in front of our face, but to remember that God is there. And God sees the end from the beginning and everything like that. So one of the things he also emphasizes in verse 25, it's a snare to rashly say it's holy and reflect only after making vows. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5 very quickly on this particular subject. God is very specific. He says, whenever you make a promise, you better keep it. And God, as he's talking to the children of Israel here in Ecclesiastes 5, he said this. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God, chapter 5, verse 1. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know what they are doing. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Let your words be few, for a dream comes from much business, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better, he says, it's better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? when dreams increase and words grow many, there's vanity or uselessness, but God is the one whom you must fear. Now, I've always liked that passage. It always emphasized to me here, he's talking about people coming to make a promise to God, and sometimes they would offer a sacrifice as a promise to God and then not fulfill the promise. That's right. How often do we do that? And sometimes Tommy gets to thinking about people that make a vow to God when they're baptized. Lord, I'm going to serve you and follow you for the rest of my life. Life happens and they quit. Does this say anything to them? Does this emphasize to them, you've made a promise? It would be better of you not to have made the promise than to make the promise and not fulfill it. Could that be the many stripes of Luke chapter 12, where he talks about a servant that knew his master's will shall be beaten with many stripes, but the one who did not know his master's will would be beaten with few stripes? I think all of that's tied in together, and it's extremely interesting as I look at this. There was a lot of people that would make a vow that something was holy and then think about it later and say, man, I wish I hadn't have done that. I wish I hadn't gave them that sheep. I wish I hadn't given them or something like that, because this could have worked out a little bit better for me if it hadn't. So again, he's talking about this sin of perjury, sacrilege. Give full consideration to a matter before you make your vow. When we think about that a lot of times today, we think about contracts, buying a car, buying a house, whatever. That is, now some things are going to happen that may be totally 100% out of our control. But at the same time, we must be willing to do what we have to do in that respect. And especially when we're making promises to God. Verse 26, the king and his subjects again. A wise king sifts out the wicked and brings a threshing wheel over them. There's the idea of him doing the punishment that needs to be done. Threshing cart. The threshing wheel was a cart that rolled over some things. It had some iron teeth in it. It was drawn by 2 oxen, and it crushed out the grain. And it cut up the straw into fodder. That's how they got it. And then they throw the fodder up in the air, and it would be blown away. So whenever you're causing the wheel to pass over the wicked, then what? You're stopping the evil. And that's what needed to be done. You're stopping the evil. The spirit of the man is the lamp of the Lord, searching for all of his innermost parts. All right? The spirit of the man. Again, here in this idea was the idea of breath. So here you have the king's subordination perhaps to Jehovah. Here it may be still talking about the king. The spirit of the man is the lamp to the Lord. It could very well be talking about the king here. It's, what is the spirit here? What would it be called here? It's something like our conscience, right? So it's the lamp of the Lord. Our conscience is a gift from God. When we have filled our lives with God's word, that lamp's going to burn brightly so that it can see the sin in our lives and help us to get rid of it. So here it is, searching all his innermost parts. Steadfast love, verse 26, let's see. Mercy and truth preserve the king, and by loving kindness he upholds his throne. Mercy, again, as I talked about earlier, in the English Standard Version, is translated more often than not steadfast love. And I like that. I like that translation. So mercy and truth preserves the king. Whenever the king shows mercy and kindness, his subjects are willing to what? Obey him. They're happy. They're content. They reduce the chance for revolution because why? They're where they need to be. The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is what? The gray hair. Yeah. You think about David when he was a young man and his strength and what all he was able to do, but later he was known for his wisdom, except for the case of Bathsheba and all that whole mess, right? But again, we can't expect young people to have the wisdom that comes from age. And again, it's interesting. I remember whenever I was younger, I had all the answers, and now I'm older, I'm sitting there knowing that I don't know half the questions.
Yeah.
if that many. And that's just the way it is. The accumulated wisdom. As I mentioned last week, the older my dad got, the quieter my dad got. And I think about that a lot. So there's that idea as well. Blows that wound cleanse away evil, strokes that make clean the innermost part. So again, you have the blows that cause a wound, they're chastisement, right? It helps us to learn. Afflictions has the effect of halting a person who has adopted evil ways. But again, some people don't learn from their evil ways, right? Strokes make clean the innermost part. Hopefully that'll get them to thinking about things in a different way. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Every way of man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the what? The heart. So here's a warning against self-deception. Here's a warning against self-complacency, that we think that our way is the best way. So we need to be careful about that. And think about, again, in that idea, God is, I like this idea that the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. Now, think about the hand of the Lord and how he can change the way a stream flows. Depositing some silt in one part of it might make a little sandbank, and so it's going to cut out more on the other side. There's that idea. The point is, the most wicked king is still under God's authority. Yep. And again, that's something to think about as well. God disposes the monarch to order his government so as to carry out the design of what he wants. Now, again, that brings up another discussion that could take forever to go through. The idea of, if God is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he is, if Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, as he is, then why would he allow atheistic nations to exist?
Yeah.
Why would he allow nations like, or people like the Khmer Rouge or Hitler or something like that totally obliterated 6 to 10 million people? Why does he allow that? And this boy's going to tell you right now, he ain't got this part figured out. But I do know that God is going to do what's right. And he's going to make everything right. So, to do righteousness, to do what's right, and to do justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. We remember hearing that phrase a lot of times in the New Testament, to do what's right. A lot of people will go through the motions of worship, offering their sacrifice, offering their worship, but they go out and live like the devil the rest of the week. He said, no. If you're going to come to me before worship, you need to make sure that what? You're doing what's right. Haughty eyes. What is a haughty eye? A haughty eye.
Proud?
Yeah, it's kind of like you're looking down your nose at everybody else. That's the way we put it. They're looking down my nose at me. It's the idea they're proud. Everybody else is inferior. They are not even worthy of notice. Again, chapter 6, verse 7, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood are things that God abominates. So here that comes back again. So he says, a proud heart, an ambitious heart, a heart that's wanting more power, more wealth, more of the things of this world than what? That's what is not acceptable. That's sin, in fact, is what it says. The lamp of the wicked is what he's talking about here. So here you have all this ideal about the kings and what they should be doing. Think about how important it is. If that's true of kings, you have the king's wisdom, the king's punishment, the king's heart, the king's duty, the king's success, the king's function, all up through here. He has to submit himself to God and keep all these things in mind. What would happen if all the presidents and all of the kings of the world to this moment in time would take the Bible and live by it? It'd be a much better world than if we all strive to live by it every day of our lives. And again, where should that actually be taking place? In God's kingdom here on earth. in his church. Always, always. All right? The providence of God. When we talk about the providence of God, what do we think of?
Well, I think of things that happen that serves God's purpose, but it wasn't necessarily directed.
Mm-hmm.
He used events to carry out his will that he didn't direct, so it's going to happen this result.
Right.
Because this happens, my will gets done anyway.
Right. Right. Again, he's going to talk a lot in this chapter, in chapter 21, about human wisdom in verse 11, verse 16, verse 20, and verse 22. And he's going to talk about true wisdom. And where does the true wisdom come from? From God. So, again, you're going to have some of the activities that speak of the fates, activities of the righteous and the wicked. So we always got to look at that from the viewpoint of what he said there in chapter 21 and verse 3. And what is that? To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. This is especially true when it comes to kings, but it also applies in everything else. So let's talk about this. God wants us to do righteousness and justice. That's what he wants more than anything else. Well, let's start looking at some of the things that you see the contrast of. The plans of the diligent leads abundance, but everyone who's hasty comes to poverty. So here's a man that having diligence is contrasted with hastiness, right? A man who has made up his mind to work steadily will find his prosperity increasing, but the get-rich-quick method is what? It always leads to disaster, don't it?
Yeah.
Always, always, always.
Yeah.
Verse 6, the getting of treasures by a lying tongue. So here you have dishonesty. Again, what does God want us to do? Righteousness and justice. But the getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor. A fleeting vapor, a fleeting fantasy for those who seek death. So here again, you're trying to get rich quick, and what? All that money's gone. Yeah. Does this speak to gambling? Does this speak to the ideal of gambling? You know, the lottery and things along that line. Again, think about that for a few minutes. It is something to think about. I always dreamed of doing this, and I got thinking about gambling one time, and a preacher friend of mine said, well, you know, you can't gamble. I said, okay. I said, do you play the Publisher Clearinghouse? He said, well, yeah, everybody plays that. I said, have you not gambled a stamp? Well, no, wait a minute. No. But nowadays, we don't have to do that. We can sign up for the Publishers Clearinghouse giveaway online, can't we? All right. I'm obviously making a joke here, but it is something that brings out that idea. We always dream. I always think about this. We dream of making all these riches and what we would do with it all. And go and look and see the track record of all these people that have made millions of dollars off the lottery or something like that and where they are now. Mm-hmm. Usually they blow through it and it's like nothing's left. And you don't have nothing to prove after or show for it after it's all said and done. So the getting of treasures by a lying tongue, here in this particular case is talking about lying to get these riches. So again, there is a slight difference between what he's saying here and that whole idea, but it's something to think about a little bit more. The violence of the wicked will destroy them because they refuse to do justice. What does God want? To do righteousness and justice. So the wicked are going to be swept away because they refuse to do what's right. By the way, the word righteousness and justice a lot of times are just simply interchangeable terms. They're synonyms. What is righteousness? To do what's right. What is justice? To do what is just. And what is just? The same thing as right, doing what's right. In fact, in the Greek, in the New Testament, the word for justice and righteousness is the same exact word. So every time I read the word righteousness in the New Testament, you could very well put in what justice is. Think about all the calls for justice nowadays in our country. Do we really know what it is? It's really what it's doing right. That's what it is. It's simply doing what's right. When you got a culture in a country that's saying every man does that which is right in his own eyes, then now the rightness and the wrongness get blurred.
Yeah.
And that's what's struggle. So how can I know what's really right and what's really wrong? The only thing I can say is we've got to go back to what God says. All right. Where was I? Verse 7, the violence of the wicked will destroy them because they refuse to do justice. The way of a guilty man is perverse, but as for the pure, his work is right. Better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. And we're saying, well, how did that play into that? But here again, you have this contentious spirit, right? You've got this situation where, some men, especially think about during the rainy season. There were certain times of the year where were rainy seasons where you just had you couldn't do much else but stay inside. Well, suppose while you're staying inside, you're dealing with a wife, a woman that's quarrelsome all the time. You just kind of at that point in time, you're ready to go brave the weather just to get out of it. And so here's that situation. The way of the wicked suggests that quarrelsome wife is evil. And so you do what's right. It's better to live in the corner of the housetop. We're going a little further. Life experiences. The soul of the wicked desires what? Verse 10, the soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no favor in his eyes. What's he saying? No mercy is a better phrase there. So again, the covetous soul is worthless, right? When a scoffer is punished, the simple become wise. What does the simple mean? What have we said that the term simple is used to talk about? The simple man is what? The naive man. The naive man who believes everything. When a wise man is instructed, he gains knowledge. All right? The righteous one observes the house of the wicked. He throws the wicked down to ruin. Who is the righteous one? Obviously, God.
I was thinking of the word foolish. You said simple.
Yeah. Foolish is, again, that's the same. Foolish, folly, simple, naive, all that puts in there. When I think of naive, more often than not, I think of a man that just walks into something without thinking things through, without looking at the circumstances, without being aware of what's going on. And that's how he winds up losing as a result of it. All right? Verse 13, whoever closes his eye to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. So again, here you have this idea, life experience, right? So we need to make sure that we are always listening to try to help our neighbors. When we display callousness, again, sometimes that's going to come back and bite us, right? That's right. And I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot because I'm a preacher and I have to sit and deal and listen with a lot of people that come to the building about needing something. Last night, for about 30 minutes, a guy before church came and talked to me. He was talking out of his head. I couldn't understand hardly anything he was trying to say. He was just talking out of his head. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm going to need you to put me up for the night. And it's like, put you up where? What do you want me to do? Well, I want 2 or 3 nights rent to stay in a motel room or something. Now, it's kind of worked out for me as a preacher. I think the Church of South Cobb knows that I'd probably give everything away. So they put somebody else in charge of that. And I said, no, all I could do is tell you, or I could talk to the guy that's in charge of that, and you call me back tomorrow. Well, the guy said, well, do you know him? No. He just come in off the street? Yeah. Is he working? Well, according to him, everybody's against him, and he's lost all of his jobs. Okay, well, now let's look at that pattern there for just a moment. I mean, it was just a long 30-minute speech. And he said, no, we're not going to help you.
There was a situation in my congregation where we can't prove it, but we think that a young man got baptized one night to have some place to stay. Mm-hmm. And I put him, he came to me, And I put him up in a hotel overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, here's some information. We get some help in the morning, we get up, call his number, and get some help. And I know she's sincere. Never heard from him. Maybe a few months later, he popped up, still in need.
Yeah.
And I gave him away. I took a chance on him, and I helped him out. And he just took advantage of the situation.
Yeah. A few years ago, I don't want to get into this detail much, but a few years ago, I was at South Cobb, and this guy calls out of the blue. He says, yeah, I want to be baptized. Well, of course, I'm automatically ears tingling and all that other stuff. I get kind of excited about the situation. And so I stood there and start talking to him for a few minutes, and I keep talking with him and all, and something just didn't sound right. I don't know what but I got his name. And before we made any other deal, I started calling some area congregations. It seemed that this particular guy, what he was doing is he was going and calling every church in the area, wanting to be baptized. And in one particular church I was part of, or I talked to about it, so in essence, this guy had been baptized probably 15 times in the last 2 weeks. All right. And one particular guy I was talking to was Leroy Dedman. He was at Woodstock at the time. Leroy said, yeah, I baptized him. He said, but I thought it was kind of funny. He was still standing there in the baptistry wet, and he asked for money. And I said, okay. But like I said, from everything I found out later, and I recognized his voice. He called me up and chewed me out because what I did right after that is I kind of called the other congregation, said, this guy, here's what his name is, this is what he's saying. He called me up, and I mean, it's been a while since I heard some of the language that I heard that day. All right. About 6 months later, out of the clear blue, he had the kind of tone of voice that it just stuck with me. I recognized, and I recognized his voice. I said, aren't you so-and-so? Yeah, how did you know? You called me about 6 months ago and chewed me out. Oh, yeah. Click. He said, I didn't appreciate you playing the tracing game. You traced me down everywhere. but what was he doing? He was just going from church to church to church, being baptized so that he could get some money out of everybody. And that's just, to me, I told him, I said, that's just wrong. You're making a mockery of what the Bible's saying about baptism. But anyway, we can talk about those, but then again, sometimes I've often said this about when we talk about the poor, the people that need it the most are not going to be asking.
Yeah.
And that's the ones I would like to find. If there's a way in the world that we can figure out a way to do that, that's the ones I really want to find to try to help. So, all right, we keep going a little further. We are at verse 13. Verse 14. A gift in secret averts anger, and a concealed bribe, strong wrath. All right. So again, it's the idea of what is he talking about here? Tranquility. You're trying. Bribery is condemned elsewhere in the Proverbs. So he's talking about the idea here of a man. Here is the fact stated. If you've gotten somebody angry at you, sometimes a gift would just make it better. But again, this bribe, concealed bribe, strong wrath. It averts anger and strong wrath. So perhaps what this passage is really teaching us is what? Try to deal with whatever's wrong, to deal with whatever sin's going on, and deal with it in such a way as to what? Reconcile that situation. When justice is done, it's joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. Why? The evildoers know that they're going to be next. So again, think about how that's so true. The righteous feel great pleasure in doing what's right. They have an answerable good conscience. They are making God's will their will. Again, but a stable society can exist only where justice is strictly administered. Right? And again, think about how often that whole thing has been kind of out of kilter in our society and how it's making things worse. Verse 16, one who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the dead. Well, that's interesting. They will only experience death. The idea they will meet a speedy death, and again, is the idea. So here's this rest is the penal punishment. So after this retribution follows death. Frugality versus waste. All right? Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. Well, it's the ideal of what? If you spend your money on all this stuff, you're not going to have nothing when it comes time. The upright versus the wicked. A ransom for the innocent is the wicked person, and in place of the upright are the faithless. All right? and the unfaithful for the upright. So again, you have these wrongly convicted people. The innocent person sometimes have to go through hardship because the wrongly convicted somebody. The faithless is the lawbreaker. So a ransom for the innocent is the wicked person, and in the place for the upright. So sometimes, have there ever been sentences bought in courts of law? Have there ever been sentences bought?
No.
No?
I said no.
The ideal that I think that I'm trying to bring out is this, the ransom for the innocent is the wicked person. So sometimes the innocent suffer because the wicked get out of the trouble that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll change mine, yes.
So what I'm trying to say is, I didn't probably,
you try to get off the sense. So
right.
You have money and influence, you buy your way out.
Most of the time you can. And I think about that so often. You hire the right lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. You can get off.
But it's amazing how they're supposed to hold up the integrity of the court of law.
Right.
For somebody who's guilty, they use everything in their power to get them off. That's not true representation. If you know the person is guilty,
mm-hmm.
and you use your wisdom, your wisdom, not godly wisdom,
mm-hmm.
to get them off. So you twist the truth, and you twist everything in your favor.
Right.
It's dishonest.
Right. So the New King James translates it, the wicked shall be a ransom for the righteous, and the unfaithful for the upright. So this ideal of ransom suggests to me buying back. So what in this way, in the New King James Version, it's shifted the gist a little bit. The wicked is the ransom for the righteous and the traitor for the upright in the English Standard Version. I think he emphasizes the idea that the wicked are going to have to pay eventually for what? For their sins, and the upright and the righteous are going to be all right out of the thing. So it's a different way they've translated it depending on how you look at it, depending from the English Standard Version, the New King James Version, and so forth. So it's interesting. The guilty person pays the penalty for the hardship which the innocent person has to undergo if they're wrongly convicted. Right? There have been people wrongly convicted. So again, when the upright suffer, whenever they're without a cause, the wicked are going to have to pay for it. So that's another way to look at this particular passage. All right. And then verse 19, it's better to dwell in the desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. This keeps popping up over and over again. I wonder why that is. And again, it's an interesting ideal in that respect that he has to keep emphasizing this. Remember again, these are the what? Words of a father to his son. So not only does he warn the son about the evil adulterous woman, but he's also warning him about, you better choose, and let's also remember this, a lot of those weddings at those times were arranged marriages. So could the man do something to help his wife not be so quarrelsome and fretful all the time? I think so. What would cause a woman to be fretful?
Lack of attention.
Lack of attention, lack of security.
Yeah.
Lack of, if they're not really trusting you. So again, when you think about that for a few moments, that kind of brings out again the ideal of us that men have a responsibility to take care of their wives, to love their wives as Christ loves the church, right? But it says so much to me. And maybe we should have some wives come in here and talk to us a little bit more about that idea. I don't know. It's something to think about, right? Right? All right. Am I sure I want to do that? Well, I would, sometimes I think it would be good just to hear their side, if we've not thought about it, Yeah. Okay. Boy, your wife's not here today. That's right.
I'm concerned, Tommy, that'd be a 2-quarter class.
You're probably right. Opposite corners. Yeah. It's just like yeah. But it's interesting. I'm oft made to wonder, and maybe sometime down the line, I may ask my wife when she comes to some of these things, how does she feel about some of these verses? And more importantly, what would cause a fretful woman? What would cause it? And I can tell you right now what my wife would say. I can tell you what causes a fretful, quarrelsome wife. It's the man. Every time that's going to be the answer. Well, there's something to be said. And I think about it again in the light of that culture. And again, what has happened if they were in an arranged marriage to begin with? What has happened to where the wife's always quarrelsome and fretful? Obviously, maybe the husband isn't doing what he needs to be doing. Something to think about. That's for another conversation, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Here's again this ideal of wealth and greed. Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but the foolish man devours it. Now, again, one of the things that was really a mark of wealth at that time was oil, having a lot of oil and treasure. They're in a wise man dwelling, but what does the foolish man do? He just goes through it. Now, if we're making the comparison today, what would we say? The foolish man would be the one that just blows through his money all the time. He's not thinking about the future, but the wise man is the man who tries to the very best of his ability to have whatever he needs as he needs it, right? So as again, you think about this, he preserves wealth. All right, verse 21. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life, righteousness, and honor. So if you're pursuing righteousness, you will receive righteousness, right? So again, think about it in that respect. The righteous are comfortable in life because they're trying to do what's right. These are the guiding principles of life. So righteousness is giving what God deserves and what man deserves it gives them what's due to them, all right? So as a result, he finds righteousness. He finds the blessings. When he's given God what God deserves and man what man deserves, then he will be blessed. And I think is what this passage is saying. All right. Verse 22. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the trusted stronghold. I don't like the English Standard Version there. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust. I guess there's two ways to look at that, English, I think the New King James Version is a little bit better. Okay? When he emphasizes that idea. Glad to have you back, brother. that internet connection, I understand. I understand perfectly. You don't have to explain nothing. I knew you was coming back. We're down to verse 22 where he talks about the ideal of the righteous. One who pursues righteousness, mercy shall find righteousness, life, and honor. So the idea of the second righteousness there, I think there in that passage is talking about the idea of if you're trying to do what's right, you show mercy, then you will receive life, blessings. The term righteousness there could have reference to blessings and honor. And then he said, a wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the trusted stronghold. The New King James says. The English Standard has it a little bit different. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust. So in which they trust, whenever I look at the word in which they trust, I went back to the wise man, but now it kind of makes better sense when I see the mighty trust in their strongholds. but the wise man brings the strongholds down. Okay? So, we go on and we see the idea wisdom is superior to brute force. Wisdom guards the mouth, verse 23 and 24. All right? Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue will keep himself out of trouble. Amen. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. So again, we've got to be careful. Watch our speech. Know when to speak, when to keep silent. Don't be presumptuous. Don't be arrogant. Don't behave in overbearing pride. So this is what the scoffer does he not? And again, think about the scoffer's attempt for revealed religion shows his pride of intellect. We don't need God. We don't need religion. We don't need any of that. And I'm sure we never hear that in our country today, right? We hear it all the time.
Yeah.
So there's that scoffer. The scoffer, again, is the arrogant, haughty man. Think about that idea of what he's trying to say here in the English Standard. He's the name of the arrogant, haughty man. Have you ever noticed these guys who deny God are always arrogant?
Yeah.
How would you define arrogance?
Overconfident, prideful, boastful.
Yeah.
Self-reliant.
Yeah. It's all about them, and they've got all the answers. And that's interesting to me. And these guys, it's interesting that, again, this phrase is used, arrogant, haughty man acts with arrogant pride. So, all right, 28, the sluggard again, right? The desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hand refused to labor. How does it kill him? Well, if you're not going to do anything about it, you're going to die because, why? You're not doing anything about it. So, so there you have that idea. Whoever guards his mouth, pride and haughty man, scoffers. And the desire of the lazy man kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. He covets greedily all day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. So the bottom line is here's a man who is always craving and craving, but the righteous gives. Why? Because he has it to give. Why? Because he's out there working and doing what needs to be done to get it done. All right? The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination. Why? Why is it an abomination to God, the sacrifice of the wicked?
It's not sincere.
It's not sincere.
Until his, what he wants. It's
right.
What you want. Don't bring me that mess.
Right. And again, how much more when he brings it with evil intent? I'll do it just because I have to. How much more? And again, think about this idea. How much more when he brings it with evil intent? The evil intent suggests his what? Heart.
Yeah.
So God knows the heart, right? That's why we come to passages such as Isaiah 1 and other passages in Isaiah, as well as Jeremiah and Ezekiel, where God says, I've had it up to here with all the sacrifices. And you guys, you have offered all these sacrifices, but for what? For absolutely nothing. He said, I'm not taking it because you're not being what you need to be. All righty? Finally, a false witness will perish, but the word of a man who hears will endure. So again, lying lips is involved there, but again, we've got to be willing to listen. A wicked man puts on a bold face, but the upright gives thought to his ways. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. I like that. We can make our plans. We can do all that we want to. We can all of that. And God says, nope, that's not going to work. It's worthless. Judgments on religious acts, judgment on judicial acts, judgment on, it's futile for you to try to come against God. You will always, always lose. And then finally, the horse is made ready for the battle, but the victory belongs to who?
Lord.
The Lord. All right. All right. Now, in the next couple of weeks, we're now getting to this part where chapter 22 begins this section that we mentioned earlier. Chapter 10 through chapter 21, mainly were wisdom of Solomon. Now we're going to start getting into some of the words of the wise, chapter 22, verse 17, the ideal of wise men that are not Solomon. All right. So we're going to see, and what I'm going to try to do is cover this as quickly as I can the next couple of weeks, trying to maybe to go through that and get through that so we can get on into the book of Ecclesiastes. All right? We're going to see some of the, for example, we're going to see more sayings of the wise in chapter 24, verse number 23. So you're going to see these kind of brought together. You have some more Proverbs of Solomon, chapter 25, verse 1, that Hezekiah's guys got together. I think we've kind of got the gist of all of this, so I'm going to try to hit the highlights from here on through here, some things that come out to me. What I would encourage you to do is to read through the rest of this, 22 through 31, see what piques your interest. Bring it out. Talk to us about it. Let us learn together, and then we're going to, like I said, get on into the book of Ecclesiastes. Thank you, guys. Maybe I have taken a little bit more time on these, but if we've seen these Solomon or these Solomonic, yeah, Proverbs this way, then we can see how it's going to come back again. And some of these same Proverbs are going to pop up again and again and again. All righty? So that's the way we're going to handle it. Probably in the next week, we'll try to get through as much of it as we can, and then try to get on into the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe a week and a half, and then get in there. All righty? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate your study. And I appreciate all of y'all so much.
Thanks, Colin. Take care, buddy.
You too. Bye-bye. About 5.
Okay.
Okay?
So we got maybe 1 or 2 more, then that 3, Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes, that's right.